And this is the 69th automation hour. All right, so if this is the first time you're joining, all lines are muted. Please post any questions that you have to the Salesforce Automation Hour Trailblazer community, and I believe Rakesh put out a link to that. Also, we will be recording this, so we will post the link to the recording as well as the deck afterwards in the Salesforce Automation Hour Trailblazer community, as well as our website, automationhour.com, and we'll be tweeting this out as well. And we are fully booked out for the rest of the year, so if you haven't registered, I highly encourage you to register. And even if you cannot attend live, register anyways, and we will send the link to the recording after the fact. And if you have a business use case with a cool automation solution that you would like to share with the community, direct message myself, Rakesh, or David, and we will keep you in mind and let you know when we start booking out for 2020. And we cannot bring this free webinar series to you without our sponsor, Concrete.io, so thank you so much. And here are your co-hosts, David Litton, myself, and Rakesh Gupta. And all three of us will be at Midwest Dreamin' next month in Chicago. So if you are attending, please come by and say hi. And with that, we are really excited to have Michelle Hansen back again. I don't even remember how many times you've been on, Michelle, but we appreciate every time you come back, and looking forward to your presentation today. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Michelle.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. I have absolutely no idea which screen it just shared, so give me a minute here.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're doing different things, you know.
You're seeing your desktop.
There we go. Let's try that one. We got a PowerPoint up here. There, do we have a PowerPoint deck?
Yes.
Fabulous. Third time is a charm, apparently, for presenting. I'll get this right maybe on the fourth. So yes, this is my third time back. I'm super excited to be here. Thanks for letting me come in and share some more fun stuff. Today, what we're going to talk about is how you can declaratively, for the most part, share files when they're uploaded to records to help keep your team in the know. Mostly it uses Flow, but there's just a tiny little bit of Apex, so we'll go into that as well. But I will be the first to tell you I am not a developer. If you ask me, code is Greek, and I don't speak Greek. So I'm really excited to kind of hopefully help some other admins out there be a little less scared of how you can do this and be able to leverage mostly the declarative tools to do this. So we'll go through the use case. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the Salesforce File Schema, which is quite an interesting story in and of itself. Then we're going to have a little story time. Boys and girls always need to sit down for story time on Friday afternoon. Then we'll show the ultimate solution we came up with. We'll do a quick demo, and then we'll have time for Q&A. As we go through the Apex part of it, I will actually stop and ask if there's any questions, so feel free to post those wherever if you've got them, and we will stop for questions, because it's a little bit involved if you're not comfortable with Apex, and goodness knows that's where I was with all of this. Okay, so our use case. I work for a software company, so we sell a solution that's basically a suite of software that does kind of like a very specialized Salesforce would. We have a customer care and billing solution that utility and telephone companies use to be able to track and manage their customers and their business. We sell accounting software so they can bill and take payments. We have an engineering suite for the field technicians to actually go out and be able to understand where all the cables are and things that help them deliver service to their customers. So as you can imagine, everybody does things just a little bit differently. And so our contracts can get a little bit complicated. So there are two pieces to our contracts when we bring on a new customer. We have a purchase order that outlines the cost, and the statement of work that outlines what actually we're going to do for that price tag. Now, because my VP team was struggling a little bit with the approval process because of the way it works in Salesforce, and the fact that what we needed to them approve was a file and not just a field on a record per se, we built a custom approval process using a custom object called SOS. It's kind of a multi-use object. It's called Services Outside of Standard. And so this was just another kind of use case for that existing custom object. So we decided to do a custom approval process using that. So we have two teams here at our company. The sales operations team creates the PO. They are in charge of pricing, and our enterprise project management team creates the statement of work, since they are the ones who pretty much handle the implementation and the work that way. So essentially, the way this is supposed to work is the purchase order and statement of work get uploaded to their individual records in Salesforce, sends a notification to the VP team. The VPs can review them, and if they want, they can request changes. If that happens, then a revised purchase order or statement of work gets uploaded to Salesforce. They review and approve the revised one more time. Once they have approved it, then we can send those for electronic signature. It's a pretty good process. Sounds like it works pretty well, right? Hold on a minute. If the original file owner is out of the office, what was happening is another user on their team had to contact one of the admins to give them collaborator rights to that file so they could upload a new version in the original file owner's absence. So our sales ops team has about 5 people on it, our EPM team has about 6 people on it, and there's exactly 2 admins that are at work. There's myself and my co-admin, Devin, who was pretty integral in helping us come up with a solution as well. So we kept having these requests, and it slowed everything down. And so we were trying to figure out, okay, so what exactly could we do to make this a little bit easier? Because clearly, none of our users were remembering that they actually had to go in and manually share this file with their teammates every time it got posted. Plus, that's like 5 extra clicks, and nobody's got time for that. So what we came up with is, why don't we automatically share that file when it's uploaded to the record? So you upload it, that's the only thing you have to do. The system will take care of the rest in the background. Sounded like a fabulous idea. I'm super excited about it. So we started digging in. And so we started digging into the file schema. So how exactly files work in Salesforce is not as easy as you might think of just, let's upload a file and there it is. So depending on how you're using files, you can use them in libraries and things along those lines. And what you have is you have a content workspace that has several different fields on it. And then that workspace ID gets connected to your content workspace document. And so the workspace document actually is the link between the workspace and the document itself. The document itself is called the content document. And so again, it's got quite a few different fields on it, including the ID, who the owner ID is, if there's a parent ID for it for any reason, when it was created, published, versioning, all of that fun stuff. So as you version that document, if you upload one or more versions of it, then you also have your content document or your content version for that document. And then your version history and your document history go along with those to kind of keep track of everything that goes along with that file. So it wasn't as straightforward as we thought with, okay, you take a file, you attach it to a record, there's a file, and that's it. So this got a little bit complicated. And then we started digging into what happens when you share it on a record. And there's several other things that are not shown in Salesforce Help in this awesome little schema. So the other things that you need to have are your content document link, your linked entity ID, the share type, and visibility. So the content document ID is basically just, I'll flip back here, this is the ID field for your content document. So this is the actual file. But what you need is you need to build a link between your document and your record. So in this case, it's our custom object SOS. So this is called your content document link. So then the linked entity ID is the ID of the record to which that file has been shared. Then you have your share type, which we'll go into in a little bit, and your visibility. And so those are the other 2 key pieces on how you need to set up any of the records in this sharing table for files when you make them happen. So this all happens behind the scenes or with point and click. If you just upload a file and do, manual sharing of that file, when you're trying to do it programmatically, it's a little bit trickier. So essentially, on our record, I've gone ahead and uploaded a file. And so if I were to do this, I upload the file, And the first thing I can see is that since I uploaded it, I'm the owner, and this is the viewer, this record. And so this file is essentially the content document ID. I need to find the ID of that particular file. The linked entity ID then becomes the ID of this record. And that's where I've shared it to and given it viewer access. The share type of this is viewer. Now, because it's a record, I'm pretty sure you can only give it viewer access because a record doesn't have the ability to actually modify it. But were you to share this with other groups or people, users, you can change that to also collaborator. And then finally, the visibility. So if you shared it to a group, you have visibility options such as all, internal, and external. So if you start using communities and you share files from communities and you have internal and external users to consider, then that's where the visibility settings start to become more important. For our use cases, we don't use communities. We don't have any external users of any sort. So essentially, we just defaulted everything to the all. So everybody that we wanted to share it with is in a group. Everyone in that group can see it. So Devin started building, and this is the flow she came up with, which was pretty cool. So basically what we did is we're like, all right, anytime a document gets uploaded, we need to figure out where it was uploaded to. So is this an SOS? That was our first decision. If it was, then I wanted to pull the SOS record information so I could decide if this SOS was for the purchase order or the statement of work. Once I made that decision, I was going to pull the group ID of the chatter group for either sales ops or EPMs so I could share the file with the appropriate team. And then once I had that information, we created the file sharing record, and then we were going to post a chatter just to let the team know that there was a new file out there that they had collaborator access to. I have a fault here, so if for some odd reason this didn't get created properly, so it couldn't be shared, I wanted the admins to be aware of it so that way we could try and be proactive and not have to wait for someone to come to us and say, hey, you know, I'm supposed to be able to upload a different version of this and I'm getting stuck. So we thought this was pretty awesome. Built the flow, started running the debugger. It was working great. Then we found out this. All of the content document objects are not available to you in Process Builder. And that's just about the only way that you can auto launch a flow declaratively. So we were pretty much dead in the water. And so now we had to figure out something else. It just so happens that about this time was Trailhead DX. And as I attended Trailhead DX, I went to boot camp after the fact, came around a corner at the Marriott Marquis and literally almost slammed into a guy I'd never met before, took a step back, apologized, and then went, wait a minute, I know you. Oh my God, you're Doug Ayers. So had a little fangirl moment because everybody knows Doug. Doug's awesome. So then happened to be there with Doug and Randy. So we snapped a selfie because that's what you do at Salesforce events, right? And so a couple of weeks later, I got to thinking and I said, you know what? I think Doug might be able to be my secret weapon. He's going to be my superhero, and I'm going to reach out and see if he will be willing to help me with this, because the only way I have to launch this is going to be through Apex, and I have no idea how to write Apex. So I reached out to him on Twitter and said, hey, Doug, if you want to say no, that's totally fine, but I'm a little lost. I have no idea how to write a trigger, and I'm stuck because I want to do this cool thing, but I need a trigger to launch it and don't know how to write this myself. Would you be willing to help? And in true awesome Doug fashion, he's like, sure, that sounds great. So he said, hey, we're going to write a blog post. Do you mind if I, give you credit for the idea? I said, no, that's perfectly fine. You do whatever you want. If I'm getting my trigger, I will do anything you ask. Bake you cookies, sing your praises to the world. So I'll actually pull the link up for you guys to see this blog post. So let me flip out of the presentation here just real quick. So, and we'll make sure that we include this in the deck when we put this up. But he wrote a blog post on how to declaratively handle with flow what happens when a file is shared to a record. So essentially, what he built out of the box is just a really simple flow. There's a start element, and then there's a post to chatter action. So you needed something besides the start in the flow so that he could package it up and share it. But the actual logic can be redefined by all of the admins in this particular flow. You just have to change all of the actions and decisions in here. So it's pretty cool. He goes through the way that you do the whole thing. He shows you all of the variables that he's created, and then here is a screenshot of just the very simple chatter post that shows up on the record when it gets shared. So he has this as a package on GitHub, so you can deploy it. My adventures with Visual Studio Code and how getting this into my org happened are a story for a different day. We could probably suffice it by saying it was a little bit more challenging than I expected. However, the Ohana is always amazing, so if there's anyone who needs some help with that, certainly reach out, and people are available that can help you figure out how to get into GitHub and get the package and put it into your org. So we did download this into our org, and as you can see, it's pretty basic. There are 4 variables and 1 action. And so the important part about all of this is where these variables are coming from. And so what Doug did in addition to this is he wrote an Apex trigger and an Apex class. So the Apex trigger is basically, someone explained this to me, it's like a manager. It just kind of sits around waiting until some information comes, and then it takes that information and passes it along to the right people. Now, the person who shared this with me is a developer, and also said that as he went up the chain and became a manager, his description on how an Apex trigger works changed slightly to be from the manager that sits around just waiting for information to the a very efficient manager that makes sure he passes along the important information to the people who need to take action on it. Okay, so we've got our flow, and now we need to launch it. So we're going to do this with a trigger. So I can read about 1/10 of this, but essentially what happens is you've got a trigger on the content document link. So anytime a content document link is going to be inserted, so when that is created, a file is uploaded to a record and that link is established, it's going to run this trigger. And so the after insert is important because it has to wait until the file actually gets committed to the database before it does anything. So then this is basically telling it that we're going to do a new version of the content document link trigger handler, which is a class. And this is where I'm still a little dicey on reading code. But basically, there's an if statement that says, if it's an insert and it's after insert, then you should do things. And this new map gets kind of important when we go over to the class. So again, bless Doug's heart for writing this. No way I could have ever possibly figured this out. Still not entirely sure what it does other than says, hey, go call this class. So the Apex class then is a little bit more involved. Instead of about 9 lines of code, we have about 58. And so basically what happens is you can read through and all of his comments explain what's going to happen. So basically, this class, after an insert of the content document link, is going to go get some information. So it wants to avoid the flow having to make extra queries, so he's tried to bulkify this for us so we don't have a problem of running into limits on the system. So the queries require a filter on the content document ID or the linked entity ID field. So even though we have what we wanted, necessarily we have to do a new query. And so that's what he's going to do. He's going to build a set of content document IDs so that anything that has been attached to that record, he can put into basically a set, which is kind of like a list or a collection, as I understand it. So then again, the next thing he's going to do is he's going to try and find the linked entity ID, the content document ID, and the latest published version ID. So we get the most recent version from that content document link where the ID is in our new list. So that's what he went up here to look for, so he could pull it down here. So then, once he has all of this information, this is where he's putting it into that map. So that new map basically is where he sets the 4 variables that we need in our flow. So he's done the query up here for us in lines 21 through roughly 34. And then he assigns all of those different pieces to variables that we will use in our flow. So we have the content document link ID, the record ID, which is the linked entity ID, the content document ID, which is the ID of our file, and then the content version. So if there's more than one, we can make sure that we get the most recent one. Then the last thing that we do is we start the flow. And so this right here, I actually had to tweak just a little bit because he named his flow one thing, and we decided that instead of just butchering his flow in case we made any mistakes, we build our own and start over. So I had to make sure that I put the API version or API name of our flow version in here. And so then all of these inputs that are up here are also passed into the flow in this line. So again, I did not write any of this code. I know just enough about what it's trying to do to be able to read most of it. But yeah, hats off to Doug for all of this. So let's stop here and see if there are any questions on any of the Apex pieces. And I'll do my best to answer them, but I am by no means an expert.
All right, so let me just refresh the community and see if there's anything. I don't see anything in the questions area at the GoToWebinar. So far, so good.
Cool, excellent. Okay, so we got this up and running. So now we built out the rest of our flow. Now, the other thing about Apex is that anytime you're going to put Apex into your org, Salesforce requires that you write a test class, which essentially says my code does what I said it was going to do. And Salesforce requires that you have at least 75% code coverage, which means you can actually test and verify that at least 75% of the lines of code, not counting comments, does what it says it's going to. And so I had recently taken the Apex Academy class that David Liu put on Pluralsight, which can't say enough good things about that. And by taking that class, I actually was able to edit the test class that Doug gave us for our org. So essentially what you do in a test class is you pretend that you have an absolutely empty org with no information in it whatsoever, no accounts, no contacts, no opportunities, nothing. And then you have to build everything that you need to test your code into that test class. So you'll notice that the test class gets a little bit longer. We went to 58 lines of code for the actual class, and I've got 95 lines of code in here for my test class. So the way this happens is it starts with an @is_test. So it basically says we are testing stuff here. This is a test class, so the system knows it. And so he's got a couple of comments here that you're going to need to modify this to be able to insert the different things that you need to meet your org's validation requirements. So for example, if you need to, insert an account, you have validation rules. All of those have to be met, so you have to account for that in your test class code. So I was actually able to go through and do all of this after I'd taken the Apex Academy. So we created a new account, and I just called it the test class account, and we require that I have a billing city and state, so I made sure to include those. From there, I wanted to create an opportunity. So then I created an opportunity on that account, and I called it the test class opportunity for the test class account. Again, you've got to make sure that you cover all your required fields. So your stage name, the account ID that it's attached to, it needs a close date. Then there's a few other required fields that we have in our org for type, division, and lead source and detail. So I needed to make sure that all of those were appropriately populated. And then this is another statement to basically insert that opportunity. After that, we get down to the actual custom object record for an SOS that we wanted to actually run this for. So now I needed to go ahead and create that, and there was a very specific type of SOS that I needed to create. So I had to actually go specify the record type ID, the name, the topic, and the opportunity it was linked to cover all of those required fields, and insert that. And so then the next thing that we tried to do is we said, okay, so we've created all the records. We want to go share this with our public group. And since we're going to test it on the purchase order, we want to make sure that it goes to sales ops. Well, there's this nifty little requirement on test classes that you can't actually create duplicate data to what exists in the system. So I tried to then recreate my sales ops collaboration group. That didn't work. So I was looking at different options, and apparently the other option that you have is that you can invoke something that basically says it can see all of your data. And so it gives your test class access to all of the data in your org. Now, this is definitely a worst practice recommendation. So we tried to sit and think about how we could deal with this instead of letting it see the information already in our org. So what we came up with is we were going to create basically a test group that we would then account for with our flow so that our flow could run through our test class and still pass it. So that's what we did next. I built a new collaboration group called the test group. And then we created a new file. And so this is basically mimicking what happens when you upload the file to a record. So we inserted the file, and then we started sharing the file to the SOS record that we had just created above. And then that is what's going to actually test the code, because what our flow is supposed to do is once this exists, it's supposed to run the trigger and run the flow. And so that's all of the things that we needed to do ahead of time to make sure that we could get to the point where our flow would fire. So then down at the bottom, this basically is what we're looking for to make sure things work appropriately. So essentially what it does is it's going to pull a list of all of the posts, the chatter posts on that record, since that's the output essentially of our flow that we could actually test for. And so basically what we want to do is we want to figure out whether or not a post was found. And so the system assert basically is a code way of saying this has to be true. So whatever you put in an assertion has to basically equal true for your test to pass. And so what we wanted it to do is we wanted it to find a chatter post on the record that includes the phrase, "You have been given collaborator access." So if all of that happens and the system can find this after it runs the test class, then what was supposed to happen in our code actually did happen. So I think it took Devin and I probably about 3 or 4 hours of testing before we could finally figure out how to get our test class to pass. But I have to tell you that there was a huge sense of accomplishment when we finally managed to do that. It was really exciting just to be able to see that I actually could manage to figure out how to do something with Apex based on just a little bit of learning and some awesome help from the Ohana. So after we wrote our test class and we realized that we needed a few more tweaks, we made a couple of other additions to our flow. And so this is our final flow for automatic file sharing. Now, right now, we really only care if this is shared to an SOS, and that's when we want to automatically share it with a specific team. Any other file that's out there, we're comfortable with just the default settings from Salesforce. So again, first question, is this an SOS? So we determine the type of SOS or the type of record a file will share to, and if it is an SOS, then we go ahead and pull that record information. Once we pull that information, we can make the determination of whether it's the purchase order or statement of work. So if it's a statement of work, we pull the ID, we create the file sharing record, it posts to chatter, and everything goes great. If it's a purchase order, we need to make one more decision into whether or not this is an actual file being posted to an actual record, or if this is being done in our test class. So if we're doing this in our test class, then I needed to pull a different group ID to be able to create that file sharing record. So that's when I come down here and I pull the group ID for the test group, as opposed to if it's in production, I pull this ID for the sales ops group. So whichever one of these is appropriate, then we use that to create that same file sharing record. So, and I'm just going to drill in here so you can kind of see what we've done. So the content document ID is the variable that Doug pulled for us. The linked entity ID is going to be the variable that we pulled from the collaboration group. So whether it was get the EPM team group ID or the sales ops group ID. The share type, you have some options on what you want this to be. So we have this as collaborator, which is C. If you wanted it to be viewer, it would be B. You can also do an inherited, which is an I, which then looks to where it's actually shared, and the system will determine what sort of access it should have. And again, the visibility that I talked to is the final requirement for setting a content document link record up in the table. And so again, all of our users are internal, and we wanted everyone in that group to have access to it, so we just set that to be all users. So then the last thing we do is we post a chatter. And so we didn't want anything too exciting, but this is where we could actually make sure that things did happen correctly without having to go into the record and check it every single time. So essentially, we just put a message in here. We mention the ID of the group that it's been shared to. And there's that phrase that we look for in our test class is you were giving collaborator access to the file that was just uploaded to this record. So we post that to the record where the file was actually uploaded to. And that's the end of our flow. So this you can customize for whatever you guys need. So if there's different things that happen on different documents based on the object they are or based on different statuses for an object, you can have this be as complicated or as simplistic as you need to basically handle that automatically behind the scenes. And you can set all the different variables for that linked entity ID. Okay, so with that, what I'll do is I'm going to very quickly just upload a file here to the record. So, apparently my internet's being super slow today. I apologize. Okay, so now we've added a file to the record. If I come in here and I look at that file, I can preview it. And then if I look at the file, or actually if I look over here at share, this will show me who all has been shared to the record. And you can see that I am the owner, the record is a viewer, and because this is a purchase order, now the sales ops team has been automatically added as a collaborator. Now, for any reason, if I wanted to come in here, I could still change this from collaborator to viewer, or I could be super mean and just completely take away their rights to this document completely. But again, instead of having to come in here and do all of this manually, the system's just going to go ahead and do that for us. So, okay, with that, that's mostly what I wanted to show. We can open it up for any questions.
Okay, so as a reminder for folks, you can submit questions two ways. You can go out to the Salesforce Automation Hour Trailblazer community and post your question, or you can use the questions feature within GoToMeeting. So we'll give folks a couple of minutes to see if they have any questions.
Sure.
And
I also put a link to Doug's blog in the chat widget. So if anybody wants to grab that from there, we'll also make sure it's part of the presentation before that gets posted.
all right, so while we wait, what would you say is your favorite feature within Flow Builder? Put you on the spot.
Put me on the spot. I mean, honestly, one of the things I like best about the new Flow Builder is how you can start typing ahead and finding the different objects that are actually relevant for what you've selected. And it kind of stops you from making some silly mistakes that you could use with the old one. I'm also a big fan of not necessarily having to figure out the difference between a fast lookup or just a regular lookup and when you should use either one of those. Because that was always something that I kind of struggled with. I mean, is this a fast lookup or is this regular lookup, and what do those two mean? And then once I finally figured it out, then it was, did I grab the right one or did I fat finger my choice there? So I share everybody else's frustrations, though. The lines not being straight is something that bothers me. And I probably spend half my time building flows just trying to make the lines straight.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
So,
like you move something and it moves a little bit and you just have to fix it.
Yeah, there's one right here that's just a little bit thicker on part of it, and for as much as I've tried, I can't make it straight, and I've just decided to be zen about this, and we're going to let this be imperfect, but it's secretly bothering me. So, but I think it's also really cool the way that they've put a lot of those actions into groups that you can go find things like, you know, sending an email or posting to Chatter are a little bit easier to find, I think, than they were before. And the color coding of like the decisions and some of those things as opposed to like the data elements, it would be nice if they were all different colors, but at least you can see at a glance. You know, usually when you're pulling information from the system somehow or putting information into the system as opposed to doing something within the flow itself, like making an assignment or you know, going down a decision tree. So, but then again, I'm attracted to bright colors and shiny objects, so colors are always going to make me happy.
I like the feature within, if you go into Manager and you can see where your variable or whatnot is being used, like that little arrow there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's super helpful.
Yes, and actually with one of the last releases, they actually put it in here, so if you click on it, it'll pop up on the canvas and show you where it is now. And that was always super helpful because I'm like, where exactly is this in my 200 little dot flow? Okay, which one is that one? So being able to find that with a click of the button is pretty fantastic. So, and I'm waiting for a couple more things to make me fall completely in love with flow, and I have no issues with it because it's a love-dislike relationship sometimes now, like creating new variables and then you have to go back in and remember to pick your variable before you move on.
It's like, I just created it. What do you think I created it for?
So, but no, definitely there's a lot of great resources out on Trailhead to start learning the new flow builder. And, you know, a lot of times it can be a little tricky if you're trying to follow the directions for an old flow. But they've done a really good job of trying to help translate what the differences are between old flow and new flow. And so I'm definitely a fan of new flow builder. So now if only they would give us access to the content objects in process folder, everything would be perfect.
Right.
But then I wouldn't be here presenting to all you lovely people on a Friday afternoon. So.
Right. Everyone's really quiet today.
So I either put everybody to sleep with story time, or Doug did a great enough job with the code that nobody has any questions left. But I guess with that, we can give everybody a little bit of their day back. But I certainly appreciate everybody attending. And as always, if you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. And again, we'll post a link to this blog on the Trailblazer community.
Hey, and you're going to be at Midwest Streaming. What are you presenting on? If folks are there.
Yes, right. I am going to be doing a session on documentation. It's called Unpretzeling Your Org, a beginning guide to documentation that won't leave you feeling salty.
Cool. And you'll have to ask Michelle about the backstory on that pretzel thing. All right. With that, thanks again, Michelle, for coming on Automation Hour, and come back again and present. And with that, we will wish everybody a good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. And we'll see you next time.
It's always fun.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.